To render the valence, this is a rather elaborate valence, but to render it, you would think the same way. It's a middle value, so, and this is the part that's closest to us, so it's going to be our 3 and 5 marker. But I'm going to start with the 10 at the back over here, because I wanted to get lighter over here, then introduce the 3 and then the 5. And then the turning point will be the 5 and 7. We're wetting it with the number 1 first, then introducing the 3, and then the 5. And since the room is overall fairly light, I don't want to have too much of the 5. So I'll start here at the back. And since you're not worried about camera angles, you can turn your page, and that makes it easier to do this. So I'm wetting my page. Now, I also want to begin to have a little bit of a highlight at the top here. I want the color to be a little bit darker down below. So while that's still wet, I can add in some of the 3. I'll start over here and start adding the 3. And this is when you let the paper and the markers do the work once you've made it wet like this. Now, your number 3 is a lot darker than mine. Your 1 and your 3 are darker than mine. So if you'd rather use your 0.5 and your 2 to start introducing these values, and especially on the bond paper, you'll be working on bond paper when you're doing this version of mine. I'm using the marker paper here. The markers appear much darker on the bond paper, so you may want to use your 0.5 and your 2 and then add your 4 and then your 5. You may want to do it a little more gradually. And then now we're getting over here, we're getting a little darker, and here will go the darkest. So I might get some 5 in to see how that's going to go. But most importantly, I wanted to get that little bit of white highlight there, and I can add a little bit of value underneath here just to get a feel for that rolling over. And the paper is still very wet, so hopefully that will take care of itself. Wanted to keep it very simple because the bed is the focus. Now for our draperies, we have shadows here, but I want to start with a little bit of the 3 at the top here. And I don't want these to be really stark shadows. Again, the bed is the focus, so I'm just going to maybe use the 5 in here, and not even that much of it, to get this set up. And then I'm using the 3. And I noticed in the last assignment that everybody put really heavy shadows in their drapery. That's not really necessary. You want to read the drapes to read as a solid shape, not separate little blocks of value, little ribbons of value. So that's your goal, is to have it read as one solid piece of drapery. So here I'll put the 5, and you can let some of that go up so that it doesn't look like an object there, but an actual shadow. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't leave the 5 sitting out there all on its own. Join it up with some 3 to make it a part of the whole. And if you have to go back and put a little more in, you can go back and put a little more in. And don't worry about little things like that. You can pick that out and clean it up with your white pencil crayon, your Prismacolor white pencil crayon, that soft pencil. So that's the 3. I'm wetting it with the 3 before I add the 5 in. Now here, around the bed, maybe I could leave a little bit more contrast. That won't be a problem. So maybe I will go in with the 5 because it's closer to the headboard now. And the line above, I didn't make it a dark line for the valance because it's an inside line. But this now is going to pump it up a little bit, the value contrast there. I'm going to leave some of the white of the paper. Back with the 5. And the markers dry lighter. So you're going to have to go back and restate some things. Even if you did use the rule of don't just make one stroke, make many, you're still going to have to go back maybe and punch these up a little bit. Just keep working them until you get what you want. It's going to be dark outside, so we can go in and this will help to set up the valance. We can use the 5. I can't really get too close to this, so I'm trying to keep my head out of the way, but you'll see. Don't be afraid to go dark out the window because it's nighttime outside and we've got the light above on. So we can go 5 in there, and then we can bring the 5 back again to put in our foliage if we like. And this will show up those diagonal lines that we put in to represent glass. It'll add more drama to the room. And again, I can't reach very well, so I'm getting little blobs everywhere, but I can clean that up a little bit later. So I could start to dot in a little bit of what's to come here, but it's probably better to wait, and we'll get to that later. But it does make it look dark outside and evening inside. Now, as I promised, with the white pencil and the gel pen, you can start to fix some of the things that went a little awry here. And it'll soften it, so you won't see that quite so much. And of course, you can always make your outline a little darker. That's something to think about as well, that after you get this all done, although you thought you put everything in as with your thick outlines, you'll see they'll disappear. They won't look nearly so dark as you thought they were. This will be easier when you're doing it on the bond paper for the in-class exercise, because bond is the greatest thing for pencil crayon. You can pick up all of the pencil crayon will show, but on marker paper it's so very smooth. That's not always the case. You can't always get that to happen. I wouldn't clean up little things like that on the bed until I actually rendered the headboard. That's the time to do that. There's one thing I really regret, and that's putting this line right here. I put it here and I put it here, and I haven't regretted anything more than I regretted that, because it really does go a long way to making the bed look as if it's made out of concrete. I made it tougher to get past that. You see, even in here, when I rolled it, I have a lighter value here, and I wet the paper with I think the 1, and then I introduced the 3. I did it all very gradually, but that line is still there, so don't put it in if you just don't. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of connections, I also don't want the shadow on the carpet to look like a thing. I don't want it to look like a big stain or something. I want to have the shadow there because it defines the bed, which is our focus, but I want to link it up with the carpet. So one of the ways you could do that, now I'm working on the bond here, is to start with the 5, start with your 5 as your shadow, which we all know their shadows should be, except for the shadows in the corner of the room. Please don't make them floating, big floating dark shadows in the corners of your room. Just leave them 1 and 3. That should be plenty. But I'm going to start to introduce it out a little bit. I'm going to jitter a little bit at the edge here so that I can take my 3 now and get that moving out into the carpet so that they join up. They're not isolated. I think that's the worst thing of all, is leaving the darker values just isolated as spots. You have to build up to them. You got to begin lightly and then build up. Build up, build up, build up. And then I can taper this off to nothing eventually. I don't even have to have, or I could even switch to the 1 and start using that too. But this is contributing to the texture of my carpet. So here's my 1 now. Oops, that's the wrong one. Here's my 1. I can start now to use this. And now I'm linking up the 3 with the 1. So I'm transitioning. You need your values to transition. They can't just be a big surprise. You got to transition from a darker one to a lighter one out to the white of the paper. And that's our ultimate goal, is to make these very spontaneous looking and very graphic looking, although they take a lot of work, and they transition. They'll transition. Now on the floor, I think I mentioned this before, but you can render that out with vertical lines. You can give yourself a starting point, a starting line, then you can render them with verticals, but it's better if you have a straight edge so you get them beautifully, beautifully straight. And you can taper off to nothing, just like that, where you're tapering off. And these verticals represent the vertical reflections on a shiny floor. So that when you go in with the next darkest value, you leave some of that former value showing. My nibs are a little old, so they're kind of rounded on the bottom and they're not making very nice verticals. But that's the idea. And then when you go in to put your wood grain in, you can just sing along like that. Sing along the grain with the direction the grain goes in. So now you have built-in reflections already. When you're using your white pencil crayon, if I wasn't able to pull off what I wanted there in the shadow, and it does look like a solid object, I think I did a pretty good job here. But if I didn't, don't forget you got this white pencil and you can dance it around. I had to do that, a lot of dancing up here to get rid of that line, but it helps you to open that shadow back up. You can put in reflected lights. I could put some down here at the bottom of the bed once I got that shadow all in, and that will help to open up everything once again so it's not all clogged or closed up.